Welcome, brother. Welcome. You see, they said I was a charlatan, a fraud, a nothing. But I am a miracle. Look and behold in wonder. And ask yourself, what does mighty Chris Formage, leader of the Epsilon program, do with his enormous power? Why, he uses it to watch people, of course. Join me anytime you like in watching. They never find out, and they can't harm you. It is the greatest pleasure on earth. And trust me, I've lain with a multitude of women.
The speech was compelling, or at least confusing, but as much as he talked about it, I did not want to enter passive mode, as this strange ethereal being from the so-called Epsilon program offered. No, I wanted revenge, or validation, or due justice, or due process, do something. I had been blown up and twisted about a tree for no reason, save being a person in a place pretty accessible to helicopter fire. I was infuriated and felt cheated. I had done nothing wrong, and yet I had been gunned down in cold rocket murder, and I did not know why. When I came to, I was standing outside Mount Zona Medical Center. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I needed to get my car. And as I scanned through the phone for the mechanic's number through the names of all the people in the world, Francisco and I had no choice but to watch a line of women stroll past, knowing no proper form of interaction. This world was full of many things, and I did not know how to properly deal with most of any of them. Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize for what happens next. I was infuriated, and I drove recklessly around town thinking of a solution, trying to think of what to do to the helicopter man, how I could even find or get to him. I went to mull over my options and get an angry chili dog at this iconic store, but it was closed. I was so angry I didn't realize at one point I had just driven past someone who wasn't actually trying to kill me, but when I turned around to try to engage in a real-life impromptu street race, he had already left. I had been told I now have a rival. I was told that if I'm killed, my murderer can steal all the cash I was carrying. My murderer hadn't even robbed me. I had upwards of $8,000 when I was blown up, which I still had minutes later as I angrily drove to the gun store to find a way to resolve all these outstanding feelings. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted a way to get back at him. In my head, I imagined some approvable form of hunting him down, using a taser and handcuffs for a citizen's arrest and dragging him peacefully to the courthouse. This store did not seem to have a taser or handcuffs. Instead, it had things like a pre-broken glass bottle, the potential uses of which did not allow for much imagination, as well as a sawed-off shotgun listed as for free. I could not stun him, and incapacitation was not an option, but I could kill him for free. I realized it then that I didn't have an option. My murderer was going to get away with it, because all the free guns in the world, even if I had been blown up, would not get me to forget who I had set off to be. I would have to let him go, knowing I had no desire to kill him, and that he would likely spend the rest of his time on Earth tormenting pedestrians unopposed, until I noticed he had been killed in what I could only assume was a terrible helicopter explosion that consumed him and the lives of his friends, while I had been tunnel vision driving to try to remedy something that in the realest sense of the word had been resolved. I had parked my car in a relatively reckless place, and when I came back it had been stolen or towed. I tried several times to call the mechanic, who I assumed had moved it, but even he thought I still had it. The day had gone from beautiful to horrible, and I resolved to simply walk near the beach to try to deal with all of it. There were interesting people here as well, confused as I was, I'm sure. They stared at me with no resolve, but I didn't feel awkwardness. For all I knew, Francisco was dead, and I had more things on my mind beyond stewing in fear, hoping that I wasn't offending somebody. As I strolled towards the pier, I get a race offer, a race appropriately titled Long Haul. I thought a long race might help clear my head, as my other choices were dwindling. We were allowed to pick very fantastic race cars. From my experience racing so far, these had significantly improved acceleration and handling. The race would go through the rest of the night and into the day. It was a really long race. It would cover 16.5 miles of highway, over bridges and covering the coast. I would fluctuate in position several times, all the way from 1st to 6th and back again, and the cars were fast. I would get in some accidents, but only be boosted back into the race for reasons I didn't understand. It wasn't difficult and it wasn't easy, and I kept going because I was there, and the world was a very beautiful place to race across. At one point I experienced an accident so bad that I fell to a flaming death off of a bridge. I immediately came back to life to continue the race, and I started to change. Francisco's journey didn't end when he died. It didn't end when I flew his plane into a bridge several times, or when I accidentally entered a death match. Those times were instanced, and could be written off as simulation because I would come right back to life, taken out of what wasn't more than a minigame. And as different as being blown up on the hill without any competitive incentive was, Francisco was, moments later, with the exception of an exhausting, condescending speech, completely fine. I had spent most of my time in the game fleeing from assumed enemies. I was afraid to die in the world, and it happened anyway. But death wasn't the end. It wasn't the end of Francisco. He was virtually unchanged after death. In fact, the biggest difference was that he was closer to his apartment on the west side. But I realized he was trapped, too. Death would not mean the end. As many times as he could die, his existence would not cease. In a way, it was liberating. Without the fear of death in his world, he could do all kinds of things without the fear of permanent erasure. Maybe Francisco was destined for more than just hiding from jet planes and street races. Maybe Francisco had a journey much more important than I realized. Maybe instead of worrying about hiding from defeat, instead of getting back what I thought I had lost for him, or fall into the demands of the game or anyone who this guy was watching, maybe instead of being the outlier in this world trying to escape from things that were not as bad as I had previously thought, maybe the place I was in was exactly where I needed to be.